Hello, party people, and welcome to Office Hours. A little different format than usual. I'm streaming live on Twitch as we speak because I can't find my microphone that I usually take down to the beach. I usually have this little small microphone that I clip to my shirt, and I can't find the thing. I don't know where it is in this condo. I absolutely flummoxed as to where this thing went. But I'm like, oh, hey, anyway, I can now show off PollGab and show the current questions and answers. This is also my live office studio down in Cabo San Lucas. I think this is the first time that I've ever streamed from down here. I should put in my restream chat here too so that I can see it, just so if anybody gets lippy in here and starts putting in anything. Brent at BrentOzar.com. Let me get my password manager up here. No, even if you zoomed in, you won't see anything because I use one of them fancy pants password managers. Oh, select all the images with bicycles. Come on now. This is utterly ridiculous. Check these boxes. Yes, I am not a robot. Okay, it says please check the new images. Yep. Okay, there are none left. Verify. I'm a human being. There you go. Suck it. So now I can at least put the chat up over in another window there. So the instructions on asking a question are up there, up at the top, pollgab.com/room/Brento. Let's go take a look at the questions that y'all have put in. So the top voted question, it is not espresso in that container, Skyward Dev. That is very observant for you there. This would be tequila. Clase Azul tequila. It's because it's 5:47 here in Cabo, so I can kind of goof off. Howdy, SQL Dev DBA. Good to see y'all. Oh, I was telling you about this little bitty office back here. So this is in my guest bedroom in Cabo San Lucas. So the quality isn't as good in terms of an office setup as my regular one is over in San Diego. But it's so nice down here. It's the beach. So you saw the beach video leading into here. So the first question comes from Nullpointer. Nullpointer says, what are your thoughts on temporal tables? I don't hear you talk about them much. Yeah, they were designed to solve one specific problem. How do you keep versions of a row inside the database without having to change the application? Most people who had this need already built something long before temporal tables came out. So temporal tables made sense for people doing new development of new applications who had that need. I just haven't seen a lot of people adopt it yet. I have nothing negative to say about it whatsoever. I've seen people who use it, who've given presentations about it. I've never had a client use it. That's not true. I think I've had one or two clients use it. But I've seen the presentations that I've seen on the implementation, how it works, how it's managed. I liked quite a bit. I didn't have a problem with it. So I was totally okay with it. I don't have anything negative that I would say like, oh, you shouldn't use it because of X. So there you go. Next up, we have Trushit asks, if my query is returning rows quickly enough, but my estimates versus actual are more than 10x, should I tune my query further, even if the speed is acceptable? So this question stems from, in mastering query tuning, I say, and in fundamentals of query tuning, I say, when you're tuning a query that isn't fast enough, here's part of the methodology that you use in order to work on it. But if the query's fast enough, put it away. Go have some tequila. Enjoy yourself, as the cool kids are starting to say. Go out and touch grass. Delicious. Next up, Burhan asks, is there a good way to estimate how much a given transaction will impact the transaction log ahead of time? No. Because, of course, a transaction can do things that you didn't expect, like call triggers. The easiest way to answer this is actually just to go do the transaction in a development environment. Take a development server and go restore a copy of production or do it in a QA environment, and then go do the same transaction that you're wondering about. And then that way you'll be able to measure exactly how much has gone into the transaction log, like do a transaction log backup before and then again after, and you'll see how big the transaction log backup is, which will kind of make that easier. Let's see here. So next up, I'm going to shrink this little poll gab window down just a little bit. Not like you need to see the tequila, but okay, there it is. Next up, Roy asks, what are the top issues that your clients run into with SQL Server's full text search performance? Now, keep in mind that people call me when their SQL Server isn't fast enough, when they're having performance problems. So, of course, I'm sure there are millions of people out there who are completely satisfied with full text performance because it's good enough. It's maybe not perfect, it's good enough. The problem that you run into, and why Stack Overflow had to abandon usage of it, is that your query might have multiple parts of the where clause. It might say, I'm only looking for the things where this is in the full text search, and that my user is allowed to see based on some joins. Well, those two things will happen independently. SQL Server will go find, not always, but usually, we'll go find all of the rows that match that full text predicate and all the rows that your user's joining to, and then find where those two things overlap. And that can be really crappy when people are searching for a very common term. Next up, Mehdi asks, hi Brent, what's a reliable way to transfer new records to another destination? I don't do any of that kind of development. What you'd want to do is check with Andy Leonard of Enterprise DNA. It's entdna.com, entdna.com. Andy Leonard does a lot of the SSIS, Azure Data Factory type work. So that's where I would start. Next up, Hazan. You'll notice we're going kind of quick today because these are pretty straightforward questions. Hazan asks, not that they're easy questions by any means, it's just that the answer is pretty black and white. Hazan asks, Brent, what are the top multi-tenant and SQL Server related issues that you see on a regular basis? So I could really do a whole entire presentation on that. And in fact, I do. It's called My Training Classes. And it just so happens that I'm running a sale over this way on my training classes. Or it's not a sale, it's boy, I said that incorrectly, didn't I? I have a new upcoming series called Fundamentals Week in March where you can attend my training, and in the fundamentals classes, I actually teach you the most common things that I run into on a regular basis to try and head off problems. So you can hit that over at brentozar.com/go/fundamentals, where it's just like a 1 week long conference that's led by me right here in Cabo San Lucas, coming to you from this exact location, where I'll talk about the fundamentals of index tuning, the fundamentals of query tuning, the fundamentals of parameter sniffing, how I use the first responder kit, and more. So you can get access to that over at brentozar.com/go/fundamentals. Wouldn't it be awesome if I could just answer that in 60 seconds? What are the things that you see the most often? But unfortunately, if it was that easy, I wouldn't have a job and no one would pay for my tequila, and that would be absolutely terrible. Oh shoot, I hit a little button that started the music too. Hold on, let me go hit that so that fires away. Next up, Carl asks, does the advice of always adding at least 2 data files to every SQL file group for performance reasons hold any water when those... I don't know where you heard that recommendation. That has never been a recommendation as far as I've seen. Carl, that's not your fault. I mean, it's just wherever you read that saying that you should always add 2 files, you should go back and check with that and check with the author, because I don't recommend that. That's not part of any standard build that I've ever done either. Next up, Sultan asks, hi Brent, how long do you wait after a SQL CU is released before you feel comfortable putting it in? Oh, this is a really good question. As soon as it comes out, like within the first 2-3 days, I like to schedule an outage on my development or QA servers, test bed type servers, where people are hammering them on a regular basis. And they might be able to catch issues before we find out about them in production. So roll them out to development first. Let them bake in there for as long as you're comfortable with. In a perfect world, you would have an automated set of testing scripts that you could run against a SQL server and verify that you didn't have performance regressions, that you didn't have incorrect results bugs, which do happen. I don't know a lot of people in that world. I don't know a lot of people who are able to actually do that. So because of that, I like rolling it out to development and QA environments first to just let people beat on it. Next up, Tolga asks, hi Brent, any plans, love your training classes and videos, you're welcome. Do you have any plans to create Azure SQL training? No. Because the problem with Azure SQL training is that it's outdated relatively quickly because Microsoft changes things pretty frequently. I always laugh at when I sit in community sessions, which the community members build and produce, and they'll be talking about something and they'll say, now let me show you how it works. And they open up the Azure portal and they go, wait a minute, this has changed since the last time I did this. And I'm like, I don't want to give a training class that looks like that. So if you're not doing it on a regular basis, and if when the product changes like crazy, it's just not a really good look. Plus, as a trainer, I lose money when I have to stop and update existing training material to match Microsoft's changes. I would much rather build you new training material, like a new course that I'm working on right now, instead of having to keep staying on this hamster wheel of updating existing training, because Microsoft keeps moving things around in the Azure portal or changing their best practices. So the thing that you look for Azure training is actually Microsoft, because they're the one company that can afford to lose money building training material. And in fact, that's exactly what they do. They have a whole documentation team that's focused on building training material for you. Now, you may not like it as much as you like things like my training, but it's free. So there you go. Nadim asks, besides the SQL Server compatibility version, what other settings should we consider updating when migrating from older to newer versions of SQL Server? See, you know what? I don't even recommend changing compat levels off the bat. Because here's the thing. Every time you upgrade SQL Server, people want to play the blame game. They want to blame the database for anything that's different. Well, you changed something. You know, this used to be much faster, and now it's slow. It's a database problem. There are not enough hours in the day for me to screw around with stuff like that. So I would rather keep as much as I can exactly the same, so that when they come in and go, well, change something. No, I didn't. It's the same as it always was. And we can go back and look at monitoring and execution plans, and the plans are the same. Then after a month or two, when the server's been up for a while and the blame game has stopped, then you can start looking at why you would want to change something. A refrain that you hear me say all the time is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? So find out what the problem is that you need to solve, and how changing SQL Server settings will help you accomplish that goal, rather than playing whack-a-mole and just randomly pushing buttons hoping things will get better. They don't usually get better. Next up, Tahir asks, hi Brent, our databases currently have recovery interval of 0. Microsoft recommends keeping this at 0 unless you experience problems. Have you ever experienced a problem with recovery interval of 0? No, I am vaguely remembering that Aaron Bertrand has blogged about this. If you search for recovery interval, Aaron Bertrand, Aaron Bertrand, he's got a blog post out there about how you measure before and after, whether things got better or worse. And he goes into exhaustive details on it. So that's the place that I would start there. Next up, Aaron says, we use 2014 compat level and soon to upgrade to 2019. How can I convince my managers to upgrade the compat level without warning? Why? Why would you do that? Why? Why? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Well, I read somewhere on the interwebs that my FaceTube had a 40% performance improvement. So, okay, if you believe that the thing's going to go faster, because there are things in 2019 compat level that will make it go faster, understand what changed so that when you switch that compat level, you know what to look out for. And we talk about that in my training. Is it too soon to do a plug? It's probably too soon to do a plug. We talk about that in my training classes, specifically mastering query tuning. I talk about what to look out for in your execution plans, what 2019 features to turn on, what 2019 features to turn off, and why each of those is. And I show you each of those features in action. If you don't go through training classes, and you won't because you're one of those broke people on YouTube. I know the people watching on Twitch, they're not like that, but the people on YouTube, they're poor. The people watching on YouTube, I'm probably pretty convinced you're not going to go to my training classes. I would love for you to prove me wrong. But if you don't go to my training classes, then the thing to be aware of is you're really just, when you change to 2019 compat level, changing the execution plans that get built. And sometimes that's better, sometimes that's worse. So you got to be really careful that the queries you've been used to having at the top of your leaderboard, the ones that use the most resources, some of them will get better, and some queries that used to be awesome will now suddenly suck. That's what we talk about in my training classes. Leonard asks, what is your opinion of SQL Server's buffer pool extensions, BPE? Has it ever gotten you over the performance finish line? I love how Leonard asks this because it tells me that Leonard has been to a lot of my webcasts where I talk about whether changing a feature or enabling a feature all of a sudden got me across the finish line with a client. I will tell you that this feature has never gotten me across the finish line. However, I have a client that has a very busy set of SQL servers, and when I came on, they already had that feature turned on. And they swore on a stack of Bibles that if that feature was turned off, their server would fall over. This client was also chock full of really smart people. I'm not saying that just to brown nose them. They haven't done anything with me in like 6 or 12 months. But I do believe that there are situations out there where it's gotten people across the finish line. I have never seen one myself. I believe that they exist. The thing that I would just caution you with is when the feature came out, even Microsoft's folks who were doing demos with it were like, the only place where it really makes sense is servers with, say, 32 to 64 gigs of RAM tops. If you have more RAM than that, then it pays off less and less. I think in the case of this client where it actually paid off really well, I think it was because their storage was completely spectacularly poor and that their local SSDs were so much faster that it made a difference. Next up, Rahmi asks, Brent, how do you know when it's time to move a high write table to a less busy file group or SAN volume? Will SP Blitz index help here? Generally, I don't move specific tables. Generally, I move databases because I don't have the time to take outages to move tables from one place to another, to deal with slowdowns while all of that is happening, because that's a logged operation. It's hitting your transaction log. And if it's a high write table, for whatever that's worth, that means something that's very concurrent. There's already a lot of writes on it. I do, in my Mastering Server Tuning class, talk about how to tell when it's time to change your storage configurations for a database, but not to nickel and dime it by moving one table around at a time. Next up, Hadir asks, is select top X without an order by bad for any particular reason? Well, it's unrepeatable. Every time that you run it, you could get different results. So that would kind of be bad. Yes, I get that when you're running it once at a time in your development environment, you see the same rows every time, and they might happen to be ordered one particular way. But in things like mastering index tuning, I teach you how, as new indexes come in, or even as parallelism settings change, it can change the order of the result sets if you don't have an order by. So if you don't care which rows you get, select top N is fine. If you care which rows you get, like you need an order, the only way to guarantee order is with an order by. Next up, Soul asks, praise be acclaimed Tortugas savior. What drives you to answer the same questions over and over again during office hours without smashing your iPad against a wall? Do you become hyped or addicted to this type of community interactions now during all worldly trends? So the thing that's really nice for me about PolGab, so you don't see me answering questions at Stack Exchange or SQL Server Central, but you do see me answering them here on PolGab because it's a different kind of question. A lot of these are opinion questions, like, have you ever seen buffer pool extensions get you across the finish line? And those are the kinds of questions that tend to fail at sites like Stack Overflow or SQL Server Central. So I kind of like opinion-based questions about databases. The ones that make me want to smash my iPad against a wall are the ones where people could Google it and get the answer within 30 seconds, syntax type ones. And I usually go through and just flag those ahead of the webcast to just get them off of the list so I don't have to bother screwing around with them. Next up, Hasan says, is always-on availability groups any faster or more efficient for replicating large amounts of transaction log activity compared to log shipping? You could do pros and cons either way. So one of the advantages of log shipping is that you control when the overhead hits the primary. You get to schedule it. It's not 24/7. It's whenever you want to take log backups. So if you have some kind of emergency where you need to shove a whole lot of data in really quickly, it's conceivable that you could turn off log shipping for a period of time. On a related note, you get to choose where the logs are written to, like you write your log backups to a central network file share, and then all the hungry hippos that are restoring those logs, they hit the log file share instead of the primary SQL server. With always-on availability groups, the more replicas that you have, they are talking directly to the primary and they consume more overhead on the primary. So for situations where you need to reinitialize across long network ranges, then you got to do all kinds of stuff like log shipping in order to get back in sync instead of just relying on availability groups. The benefits of always-on availability groups is that you get near real-time replication, whereas with log shipping, you have to kick people out of the database who are running queries in order to apply your restores. Next up, a friend of mine says, is saying that certification is worth nothing. What do you think about paid trainings? Well, one of the things about paid trainings is that they teach you how to properly type the word paid, which is P-A-I-D. Paid training, are they always worth money well spent? No, not paid trainings can be worth garbage too. I remember the first SQL Server, the first SQL Server training class I ever sat in on. Was taught by someone who had clearly never done the thing that they were teaching other than stepping through it once in like AdventureWorks. They'd step through the GUI, they'd step through the steps inside the book, and they had never done it at production scale. So I'm sitting in this class, and the person's like, okay, so first we're going to open up your books and follow the instructions on these pages. Just do exactly what it says in the books. And I'm reading through it, and I'm raising my hand, and I'm like, so the thing is, if you have a 200 gigabyte database, this step 3 here won't work because it'll take like an hour in order to run. He's like, that's okay. For the purposes of this class, we're just using AdventureWorks. And I'm like, yeah, but this doesn't work in real life. So you can find people out there who are doing paid training who've never actually done the thing. That research is left up to you. That's also why I still do a mix of consulting and training. I think it's important to keep your skills sharp. I don't want to be just reading out of a book that somebody else wrote and going, here's how you do the thing. Next up, Rico Suave asks, hi Brent, love your classes. How often do you update or reshoot previously recorded class videos? What I do is every time I deliver a class live, I record it just every single time. And then I go back afterwards and I say, was that recording better than the recordings that are up on the site? And if it is, I just replace them. So everything that I teach on there that's recorded, I still teach live. Now, as I start to taper that off, like some of the classes, fundamentals of TempDB, I no longer teach live. Some of those, I'm like, the recordings up there are flawless. Just there you go. And then we'll take one more. We'll take Jonas asks, is query cost or logical reads a better identifier of expensive queries? Query cost is meaningless, is utterly meaningless. And to find out why, go watch my totally free class over on YouTube, How to Think Like the Engine. Search for Brent Ozar, How to Think Like the Engine. And that'll teach you in about 90 minutes how to measure things like query performance overhead and why query cost is utterly meaningless. And when you've graduated from that, it's time for Fundamentals Week over at brentozar.com/go/fundamentals. You can get a week's long training class with me, Brent Ozar. And I've got 2 rounds of it coming up in March. I've got one focused on America's time and then one focused in Europe time as well. So, and your ticket gets you into both. So if you end up having an emergency at work and you miss one of the days, well, you can catch that same class live in another time zone if you hit the next week. All right, so that is our office hours for this week. I hope that y'all had fun and learned something, and I will see y'all next time on Office Hours. Adios, y'all.